All right, so we're diving into Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection today.
Definitely a good one.
Yeah, and this is for anyone who's ever felt like they're not enough,
Oh, yeah.
or anyone who's, kind of struggled with the idea of being perfect and wants to find a way to live a more authentic and wholehearted life.
Absolutely. And what I think is really interesting about this book is that it's not your typical self-help book,
Right.
Brent, she didn't actually set out to write a how-to guide or anything like that.
Really?
She's a researcher, and she spent years studying shame, vulnerability, and what makes people resilient.
Okay.
And this book, it's based on all that research, like years of interviews and observations.
So she was really looking at what makes people tick.
Exactly, and she was particularly interested in connection, like what allows us to form deep, meaningful bonds with others.
Okay, that makes sense.
But she kept running into this one major obstacle.
What's that?
Shame.
Yeah, shame's a big one.
It's like this barrier that keeps us from being vulnerable and authentic.
It's like that fear of being judged or rejected.
Great, and so that's actually how she ended up focusing on the people who seemed to be immune to shame's effects.
Okay, so who are these people?
She calls them the wholehearted.
The wholehearted?
Yeah, catchy, right?
It does have a nice ring to it, but I have to admit it sounds a little...
cheesy.
Maybe a bit. Yeah.
I know, but trust me, there's a lot more to it than just a feel-good phrase.
Okay, so what does it actually mean to be wholehearted?
Well, through her research, Brown discovered that these wholehearted individuals, they share certain traits.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one, they embrace vulnerability.
Interesting. Most people are trying to hide their flaws, not embrace them.
I know, right? But the wholehearted folks, they get it.
What do they get?
They understand that vulnerability is actually the key to connection. It's about letting people see the real you, imperfections and all that.
So instead of trying to be perfect all the time.
Exactly. They're okay with being imperfect.
Huh. So that's part of being wholehearted.
It is. And here's the other thing. They let go of what other people think.
Wow, that's easier said than done.
Totally. But the wholehearted, they're not weighed down by the need for approval or validation from others.
They're just comfortable in their own skin.
Exactly. And that allows them to show up in the world with more courage, compassion, and authenticity.
Okay, so she's saying that these things, vulnerability, imperfection, and letting go of what other people think, these are actually the keys to living a more wholehearted life.
Precisely, she calls them the gifts of imperfection.
The gifts of imperfection, huh?
I like that.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept, and it kind of flips the script on how we usually think about success and happiness.
So instead of striving for perfection, we should be embracing our imperfections.
Exactly, because those imperfections, they're what make us unique, and they're what allow us to connect with others on a deeper level.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
And Brown, she has this great story about how she personally discovered the power of vulnerability. Oh, really?
Yeah, she's giving a talk, and it totally bombed. Like, she completely froze up.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
I know, it's every speaker's worst nightmare, right?
Totally.
And afterwards, she was mortified.
I bet.
She just wanted to hide and never show her face again.
I would probably crawl into a hole.
Right. But instead of doing that, she called her sister for support.
Her sister?
Yep, and, calling your sister after a bad presentation might not seem like a big deal.
I mean, it's pretty normal.
Right? Right. But for Brown, it was a turning point.
Why is that?
Because it was in that moment of vulnerability that she realized something really important.
What was it?
She realized that sharing her imperfection, her struggle with someone she trusted, actually created a deeper connection with them.
Interesting.
It showed her that true connection doesn't come from pretending to be perfect.
It comes from being real.
Exactly. It comes from letting people see the real you, even the messy part.
Okay, so vulnerability is like the key to unlocking deeper relationships.
Precisely. And that leads us to another big theme in Brown's work, love.
Love. All right, let's talk about love.
She defines love as practicing courage, compassion, and connection in our relationships.
That makes sense.
But here's the twist.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
She says, you can't give love that you don't have for yourself.
Wait, so self-love is a prerequisite for loving others?
Exactly.
Huh. That seems a little counterintuitive.
I know it might sound a bit selfish at first.
Yeah.
But Brown argues that self-love isn't about being narcissistic or self-absorbed. It's about recognizing your own worthiness and treating yourself with the same kindness and compassion that you would offer to someone you love.
So it's more about self-acceptance than self-obsession.
Exactly. And this idea actually sparked a huge debate online.
Really?
Yeah. Brown claimed that we can't love others more than ourselves.
Ooh, that's a bold statement.
It is, and it ruffled a lot of feathers.
I can imagine people had strong opinions about that
Oh,
one.
yeah, definitely. But we'll dive into that debate a bit
I'm
later.
just looking forward to that.
But for now, let's stick with this idea of self-love being essential for wholehearted living.
Okay.
Because it's really at the core of everything Brown talks about.
It's like the foundation.
Exactly, and if we don't have that solid foundation, it's hard to build anything meaningful on top of it.
So how do we even begin to cultivate self-love?
Well, that's a big question, and we'll definitely explore it more deeply in this deep dive.
Okay, good, because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with.
Absolutely, but before we get into the how-tos, Brown identifies several obstacles that get in the way of wholehearted living.
Okay, obstacles like what?
Well, she talks about perfectionism,
Uh-oh.
numbing,
Oh, boy.
and scarcity.
Yikes, those sound pretty intense.
They can be, but don't worry, Brown also offers a roadmap for overcoming these obstacles and cultivating a more wholehearted life.
Okay, good. I was starting to get a little worried there.
So are you ready to dive into these obstacles?
Let's do it.
All right, then
Yeah.
buckle up, because it's about to get real.
Oh, I'm ready for it.
Great, because these obstacles, they're things that we all face at some point in our lives.
I have a feeling we're all going to be able to relate to this.
I think so too, because, whether it's perfectionism, numbing, or scarcity, these are patterns that can really hold us back from experiencing true joy and connection.
Okay, so let's start with perfectionism. What exactly does Brown say about that?
She calls it a self-destructive belief system.
A belief system?
Yeah, it's this idea that we have to be perfect in order to be worthy of love and belonging.
Oh, wow. I know a lot of people who struggle with that.
Yeah, it's incredibly common, and it can manifest in so many different ways.
So, what are some signs that someone might be struggling with perfectionism?
Well, they might be constantly striving for flawlessness in everything they do.
Always trying to be the best.
Exactly. They might be highly critical of themselves and others.
And they might have a hard time accepting compliments.
Right, because they always feel like they could have done better.
So it's like this never-ending cycle of trying to reach an unattainable standard.
Exactly, and that's why Brown calls it self-destructive.
Because it's just setting us up for failure.
Right, because no one can be perfect all the time.
And when we try to be perfect, we end up feeling inadequate and ashamed.
Exactly, and that shame, it can lead us to hide our true selves from the world.
Because we're afraid of being judged.
Right, and that's how perfectionism actually ends up disconnecting us from others.
So it's like the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
Exactly, we're trying to connect, but perfectionism is pushing people away.
Wow, that's a powerful insight.
And, it's something that I think a lot of us can relate to in some way.
Yeah, I definitely see parts of myself in that description.
Me too. And I think it's important to remember that perfectionism isn't always obvious.
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes it can be disguised as high achievement or overworking.
Like someone who's always busy and productive.
Exactly. And on the surface, it might look like they have it all together.
Right, they might seem successful and driven.
But underneath it all, they might be driven by this fear of failure or this need to prove themselves.
It's not really about the achievement. It's about what's driving it.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of our own patterns and motivations.
So we can start to challenge those perfectionistic tendencies.
Right, because the truth is that perfectionism doesn't lead to happiness or fulfillment.
In fact, it often leads to the opposite.
Exactly. It can lead to anxiety, burnout, and even depression.
So how do we break free from this perfectionism trap?
Well, that's a question that we'll explore more deeply in this deep dive.
Okay, I'm definitely interested in learning more about that.
But for now, I think it's important to just acknowledge that perfectionism is a real thing.
And it's something that many of us struggle with.
Exactly, and the first step to overcoming any obstacle is to recognize that it exists.
So awareness is key.
Absolutely, and once we're aware of our perfectionistic tendencies, we can start to challenge them and replace them with more compassionate and realistic expectations.
I like that. Replace perfectionism with compassion.
Yeah, because ultimately perfectionism is all about fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough.
And compassion is the antidote to fear.
Precisely. It's about offering ourselves kindness and understanding even when we make mistakes.
Okay, so that's perfectionism.
Right.
What about numbing? What is that all about?
Well, numbing is basically anything we do to avoid dealing with uncomfortable emotions.
Oh, so like when I eat a whole pint of ice cream after a bad day.
Exactly. Or when you scroll through social media for hours instead of facing that pile of laundry.
Yep, that's me.
It's something we all do to some extent.
I think so.
And it's not always a bad thing.
Really?
I mean, sometimes we need a little distraction to help us cope with stress or difficult situations.
Like watching a funny movie after a tough day at work.
Exactly. But the problem with numbing is that it becomes a problem when it's our primary way of dealing with emotions.
Okay, so like when it becomes a habit.
Exactly. Because when we numb out our emotions, we're also numbing out our joy and our connection to ourselves and others.
Because we're not really present.
Right, we're just going through the motions and we're not fully experiencing life.
And it can lead to feeling empty and unfulfilled.
Exactly. And Brown, she talks about how numbing can take many different forms.
Like what?
Well, it can be anything from overworking and overeating to excessive shopping or spending too much time online.
It's basically anything that takes us out of the present moment and disconnects us from our feelings.
Precisely. And she argues that the first step to overcoming numbing is to identify our go-to numbing behaviors.
Okay, so we need to become aware of what we do to avoid our emotions.
Exactly. And once we're aware of those patterns, we can start to make different choices.
Like what kind of choices?
Well, instead of reaching for that bag of chips when we're feeling stressed, we could try going for a walk or talking to a friend.
Okay, so finding healthier ways to cope with our emotions.
Exactly. And, it's not about being perfect.
Of course not.
It's about progress, not perfection.
I like that.
It's about making small changes over time and gradually building up our resilience.
So we can face our emotions head on instead of running away from them.
Exactly. And when we do that, when we allow ourselves to feel our emotions fully, we open ourselves up to experiencing more joy and connection in our lives.
Because we're no longer hiding from ourselves.
Right. We're showing up authentically, and that's when we truly start to live wholehearted lives.
Okay, so we've talked about perfectionism and numbing. What about scarcity?
Scarcity. This one's a biggie.
What is it exactly?
Well, Brown describes scarcity as this pervasive fear that there's not enough to go around.
Not enough of what?
Not enough of anything, really.
So like not enough love, not enough money, not enough success.
Exactly. It's this feeling that we're constantly competing with others for a limited supply of resources.
Oh, I've definitely felt that before.
I think we all have at some point.
It's like that feeling of never having enough or never being enough.
Precisely. And Brown argues that scarcity is a mindset that keeps us stuck in a cycle of fear and comparison.
Because we're always worried about what other people have or what we're missing out on.
Exactly. And it can manifest in so many different ways.
Like how?
Well, it can show up in our relationships.
Like feeling jealous or possessive.
Right. Or in our work.
Like feeling like we're constantly competing with our colleagues.
Exactly, or even in our finances.
Like feeling like we'll never have enough money.
Precisely. And the thing about scarcity is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
What do you mean?
Well, when we believe that there's not enough to go around, we tend to act in ways that confirm that belief.
So like we hoard resources or sabotage ourselves.
Exactly, and that just perpetuates the cycle of scarcity.
So how do we break free from this scarcity mindset?
Well, Brown suggests that we need to cultivate a mindset of abundance.
Abundance.
Yeah, it's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we have.
So like practicing gratitude.
Exactly. Gratitude is a powerful antidote to scarcity.
Because it helps us appreciate what we already have.
Right, and when we focus on the good things in our lives, we start to attract more good things.
So it's like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly. And Brown, she also talks about the importance of generosity.
Generosity.
Yeah, because when we give freely to others, we actually create more abundance in our own lives.
It's like the more we give, the more we receive.
Exactly. And, it doesn't have to be about material things.
Right. It could be about giving our time or our talents.
Precisely. It's about sharing our gifts with the world and trusting that the universe will provide for our needs.
Wow, that's a beautiful concept.
It is. And it's a powerful reminder that we're all interconnected.
And that we don't have to go through life feeling like we're constantly competing with each other.
Right. We can choose to collaborate and support each other instead.
And that's how we create a more abundant world for everyone.
Exactly. So are you ready to move on to Brown's 10 guideposts for wholehearted living?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, then let's dive in and explore how we can cultivate a more courageous, compassionate, and connected life.
I'm excited to learn more.
Great, because these guideposts, they offer practical strategies for overcoming these obstacles and living a more wholehearted life.
I'm ready for it.
Awesome, then let's get started.
Okay, 10 guideposts. That's a lot to unpack.
It is, yeah.
So maybe we could just focus on a few that really stood out to you.
Sure, yeah.
And that you think would be most helpful for our listeners who are, on this journey toward wholehearted living.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's see.
What really resonated with you?
I think authenticity, self-compassion, and cultivating gratitude and joy.
Okay, those are good ones.
Those are all really interconnected, and I think they're really powerful for creating a more wholehearted life.
Yeah, I agree. So let's start with authenticity.
Okay.
I think a lot of people struggle with, really being themselves, especially these days with social media and everything.
Totally. It's like everyone's trying to project this perfect image.
Yeah, it's hard to know what's real anymore.
Right. And so I think it's more important than ever to really understand what authenticity means.
So what is Brown's take on it?
Well, she says that authenticity is about letting go of who we think we're supposed to be.
Okay.
And embracing who we truly are.
So it's about being genuine.
Exactly. It's about showing up in the world without masks or pretenses.
But isn't that kind of scary?
It can be, yeah.
I mean, what if people don't like the real us?
That's a valid fear.
What if we get rejected or judged?
I think that's something that we all worry about to some extent.
Yeah, definitely.
But Brown, she argues that vulnerability is actually the birthplace of connection and joy.
Really?
Yeah, she says that when we dare to be ourselves, we give other people permission to do the same.
That makes sense.
It's like we're creating a space for genuine belonging.
So authenticity is less about fitting in and more about standing out.
Exactly. It's about embracing what makes you unique.
And trusting that the right people will appreciate that.
Precisely. And that's where self-compassion comes in.
Okay, self-compassion.
Yeah, because being authentic can be tough.
Yeah, you're putting yourself out there.
Right. And so it's essential to have self-compassion to support you along the way.
So what does self-compassion look like in practice?
Well, it's about treating yourself with kindness, understanding, and acceptance.
Even when we make mistakes.
Especially when we make mistakes.
That's hard.
It is. It's much easier to be critical of ourselves than to offer ourselves grace.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that.
Me too. But Brown, she suggests that we try talking to ourselves the way we would talk to a friend in need.
That's a good idea.
Like imagine offering yourself words of support and encouragement.
Instead of judgment and criticism?
Exactly. It's about being your own best friend.
Okay, so we're replacing the inner critic with the inner cheerleader.
Exactly. And that can make a huge difference in how we feel about ourselves.
And how we navigate challenges.
Right, because when we're kind to ourselves, we're more resilient.
We can bounce back from setbacks more easily.
Exactly. And this ties into the guidepost of cultivating gratitude and joy.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, Brown reminds us that gratitude and joy aren't things that we have to earn.
So they're not like rewards for good behavior.
Exactly. They're available to us in every moment.
Yeah. Wait, so you're saying that joy is a choice?
I am.
I always thought it was something that just happened to you, like, you win the lottery and you feel joyful.
Well, that's certainly one way to experience joy.
But you're saying it's more than that.
It is Brown. She argues that joy is a practice, a way of perceiving the world.
Okay, so it's about choosing to see the good even when things are tough.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective and focusing on what we're grateful for.
So instead of dwelling on what's wrong,
right, we choose to appreciate what's right.
And that helps us cultivate a more joyful outlook on life.
Exactly, and gratitude is a really powerful tool for this.
Yeah, because when we take time to appreciate what we have, we feel more abundant.
Precisely. It helps us move away from that scarcity mindset.
And into a more abundant mindset.
Exactly. And, it doesn't mean that we have to pretend everything is perfect.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the challenges while also appreciating the good.
Like finding the silver lining.
Exactly. And, this reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about wholehearted people being okay with imperfection.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the reason why they're able to experience more joy.
Because they're not striving for something that's unattainable.
Exactly. They've let go of the need for everything to be perfect.
And that creates space for more joy and spontaneity.
Right. It's like giving ourselves permission to be human, flaws and all.
I love that. So what about play and rest?
Oh, those are good ones.
I think a lot of people, especially adults,
yeah,
we forget how to play and we feel guilty about resting.
It's true. Our culture really glorifies busyness and productivity.
It's like we're always supposed to be doing something.
Right. But Brown, she argues that play and rest aren't indulgences.
Okay.
They're necessities.
They're essential for our well-being.
Exactly, both physically and mentally.
So what are some of the benefits of play?
Well, play helps us to recharge and reconnect with our creativity.
It's like tapping into our inner child.
Exactly, and it allows us to let loose and have fun without self-consciousness.
I think that's something that a lot of adults have forgotten how to do.
Yeah, we take ourselves way too seriously sometimes.
So how can we incorporate more play into our lives?
Well, it can be anything that brings you joy and helps you let go of stress.
Like, what are some examples?
It could be dancing, singing, playing games,
Okay.
spending time in nature, pursuing creative hobbies.
So basically anything that feels fun and lighthearted.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
Right.
It can be as simple as taking a few minutes to dance to your favorite song.
Or playing a game with your kids.
Exactly, it's about finding those little moments of joy throughout the day.
Okay, so what about rest? Why is that so important?
Well, when we're constantly on the go, our bodies and minds don't have a chance to recharge.
That's true. We live in a very go society.
Yeah, and that can lead to stress burnout and even health problems.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that.
I think a lot of us have.
So how do we prioritize rest when it feels like there's always something that needs to be done?
Well, first of all, it's important to recognize that rest is not a reward for hard work.
Okay.
It's a necessity for well-being.
So we shouldn't feel guilty about taking time to rest.
Exactly. And then, try to build rest into your schedule.
Like actually schedule it in.
Yeah, just like you would schedule any other important appointment.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then finally, be mindful of how you spend your downtime.
So like, are we actually relaxing or are we just filling our time with more busy work?
Exactly, because sometimes we can be really good at staying busy even when we're supposed to be relaxing.
Like scrolling through social media or checking email.
Right, and that's not true rest.
True rest is about disconnecting and allowing our bodies and minds to recharge.
Exactly, and this can look different for everyone.
Right, some people might need to meditate while others might need to take a nap.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you and making it a priority.
Okay, so we've covered authenticity, self-compassion, gratitude, and joy, play, and rest.
Yeah.
What about meaningful work?
Ah, yes, that's another really important
I
one.
think a lot of people are searching for meaningful work,
Totally.
especially in a world where it's easy to feel like a cog in a machine.
Right, and so it's more important than ever to understand what meaningful work actually means.
So what does Brown say about it?
Well, she defines meaningful work as work that aligns with our values,
Okay,
uses our gifts and talents, and makes a contribution to the world.
so it's not just about earning a paycheck.
It's not just about the money, no.
It's about making a difference.
Exactly, it's about feeling like you're doing something that matters.
And that you're using your unique skills and abilities to make the world a better place.
Precisely, and Brown, she emphasizes that meaningful work is not something that just happens to us.
So it's not like we just stumble upon it.
It's not like that, no, it's something that we cultivate.
So we have to be proactive.
We do. We have to be intentional about seeking out work that aligns with our values and our passions.
And that can be a journey.
It can be, yeah. And Brown, she acknowledges that finding meaningful work can be challenging.
I bet.
Sometimes our passions don't align with our current career path.
Right.
Or maybe we haven't yet discovered our true gifts and talents.
So what advice does she offer for people who are still searching for that sense of purpose in their work?
Well, she encourages exploration and experimentation.
So like trying new things.
Exactly. Volunteering, taking classes to develop new skills.
Yeah.
Talking to people who are doing work that inspires us.
So it's about being curious and open to possibilities.
Exactly. It's about saying yes to opportunities even if they're outside of our comfort zone.
Because we never know where they might lead.
Right. And Brown, she also reminds us that meaning can be found in many different places.
Okay, so it's not just about our paid work.
It's not just about our jobs.
Yeah.
No, it can also be found in our relationships,
Okay.
our hobbies, our community involvement.
So it's about finding ways to contribute and make a difference in the world.
Exactly. And, when we find that sense of meaning in our lives,
Yeah.
it gives us a sense of purpose and fulfillment that money can't buy.
So it's really about aligning our actions with our values.
Precisely. And living a life that feels authentic and true to ourselves.
And that's what wholehearted living is all about.
Exactly. It's about showing up in the world with our whole hearts.
Imperfections and all.
Exactly. And embracing the journey with all its ups and downs.
I think that's a great place to pause for now.
Okay.
And give our listeners a chance to reflect on what we've discussed.
Yeah.
Which of these guideposts resonates with you the most?
Yeah.
What are some small steps you can take to incorporate these principles into your own life?
Good questions.
We'll be back with our final thoughts in just a moment. So much to think about from the Gifts of Imperfection.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
I keep coming back to that idea of letting go of perfectionism.
That's a big one.
It really is. Like, Brown's research shows that it's actually the people who embrace their imperfections who experience the most joy and connection.
It's so true. They're not afraid to let their guard down and just be themselves.
Right, and it's so liberating when you think about it.
It really is like you're giving yourself permission to be human.
With all the flaws and quirks.
Exactly, and that ties into the self-compassion piece, too.
Right, like when we can be kind to ourselves even when we mess up.
Exactly, it makes it so much easier to let go of that need to be perfect.
It's like we're not carrying around all that shame and self-doubt.
Right, and that frees us up to experience more joy and connection.
And speaking of joy, I love how Brown talks about cultivating gratitude and joy as practices.
It's a shift in perspective.
It really is. Like, instead of focusing on what's missing,
we start to appreciate what we have.
And that can make such a big difference in how we experience the world.
It really can. It's like we're retraining our brains to see the good.
And that brings us back to those other guideposts we talked about, play and rest.
Ah, yes. Essential ingredients for wholehearted living.
They really are. I know when I make time for play and rest, I feel so much more energized and creative.
Me too. It's like we're giving ourselves permission to recharge.
And that allows us to show up more fully in other areas of our lives.
Exactly. And Brown, she also talks about meaningful work as being a key part of wholehearted living.
Right. It's not just about having a job. It's about finding work that aligns with our values and makes a contribution to the world.
Exactly. And sometimes that means stepping outside of our comfort zones and challenging societal expectations.
It can be a journey for sure.
It is, but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. Well, this has been such a rich and insightful conversation.
I agree.
I hope our listeners have gained some valuable takeaways from this deep dive into the gifts of imperfection.
Me too. And, even though the book is called The Gifts of Imperfection, it really raises a lot of questions about how our culture defines success and worthiness.
It does. Like, what does it really mean to be enough in a society that's constantly telling us we need to be more?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that each of us has to grapple with individually.
There's no easy answer.
No, but I think the journey itself is what matters.
It's about showing up every day and striving to live a more authentic and wholehearted life.
Exactly. Imperfections and all.
Imperfections and all. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the gifts of imperfection.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, keep digging deep.
And keep listening.